Unity Certified User, Programmer. Stop right there, because if you want to pass the Unity Certified User exam, you need to know exactly what they are going to ask you. Most people fail because they focus on the wrong things. In this video, I am going to walk you through the real questions, the tricky logic, and the code snippets that show up on the test. Let's make sure you get certified on your first try. This is just a part of the complete course. You can get the link in the description for the complete practice questions with explanations, which will help you get your certification. I have also put a link to my Udemy practice test and a special Etsy visual guide for those who like to see how things work with pictures. Section 1. C# Basics and Variables. Let's start with the basics, because, without a strong foundation, everything else falls apart. When you write code in Unity, you are giving instructions to the computer. Think of it like a recipe. You need ingredients, which we call variables, and you need steps to follow, which we call functions or methods. In C#, every variable needs a type. You can't just put anything anywhere. If you want to count apples, you use an integer, or int. 5 miles per hour, you use a float. A float is just a number with a decimal point. In Unity, you will use floats a lot for things like position, rotation, and speed. Don't forget to put an f at the end of the number, or Unity will get confused. Then we have strings. A string is just text. It's used for names, messages, or anything you want to read. You always wrap strings in quote marks. If you don't use quotes, the computer thinks you are trying to write code commands, and it will give you an error. Now, let's talk about where your code lives. In Unity, most of your scripts will sit on objects in the game. To do this, your script has to inherit from mono behavior. That is a big word, but it just means your script can attach to a game object. If you don't see mono behavior at the top of your class, you can't drag that script onto your player or enemy. Scope is another big idea you need to get. Scope is about who can see your variables. If you make a variable public, two things happen. First, other scripts can see it and change it. Second, and this is cool, you can see it in the Unity Inspector window. This means you can change the number while the game is running to test things out. If you make it private, only that specific script knows it exists. It is safer, but less flexible. You will also see serialize field a lot. This is a special trick. It lets you keep a variable private so other scripts can't mess with it, but you can still see it and edit it in the Unity Inspector. It is the best of both worlds. Finally, let's look at functions. The two most common ones are start and update. Start runs once, right when the object comes into the game. It is great for setting up ammo or health. Update runs every single frame. If your game runs at 60 frames per second, update runs 60 times every second. This is where you put code for moving or checking for button presses. If you find reading code hard, sometimes looking at a diagram helps. I have some visual study guides on Etsy that break these code blocks down into pictures. It makes it much easier to remember. Also, practicing these concepts is key. My Udemy course has hundreds of these questions so you can test yourself until you are ready. Practice questions. 1. What data type should you use to store a player's name? Answer: string. Explanation: string is the correct type for text characters and words. 2. Which method runs only one time when the script first loads? Answer: start. Explanation: the start method is used for initialization and runs before the first frame update. 3. If you want a variable to show up in the inspector, but keep it private in code, what attribute do you use? Answer: serialize field. Explanation: this attribute forces Unity to serialize a private field so you can edit it in the editor. 4. What is the correct way to write a float number in C#? 5f. Explanation: you must add the letter f after the number to tell the compiler it is a float, not a double. 5. Which method runs repeatedly, once per frame? Answer: update. Explanation: update is called every frame and is used for logic that happens continuously, like movement. 6. What keyword makes a variable accessible to other scripts? Answer: public. Explanation: public access modifiers allow other classes and scripts to read or change the variable. 7. What must a script inherit from to be attached to a GameObject? Answer: mono behavior. Explanation: mono behavior is the base class for every script that needs to work as a component in Unity. 8. How do you write a comment in C# that the computer ignores? Answer: comment. Explanation: two forward slashes tell the compiler to ignore everything after them on that line. 9. What is the default value of a Boolean variable if you don't set it? Answer: false. Explanation: Booleans automatically start as false unless you specifically write code to make them true. 10. If you have a syntax error, like a missing semicolon, what happens? Answer: the game will not run. Explanation: syntax errors stop the compiler, so you cannot play the game until you fix them. 11. What operator do you use to check if two values are equal? Answer: equals equals. Explanation: a single equals sign assigns a value, but a double equals sign compares two values. 12. Which loop is best if you want to run code a specific number of times? Answer: for loop. Explanation: a for loop is designed to count and run a block of code a set number of times. 13. What creates a whole number variable? Answer: int. Explanation: int, or integer, is used for whole numbers without any decimal points. 14. Where should you look to see errors in your code within Unity? Answer: console window. Explanation: the console displays all errors, warnings, and debug messages from your code. 15. Log do. Answer: prints a message to the console. Explanation: it is used by programmers to check if code is working by sending text messages to the console window. Section 2. Game Objects and Components. Now, let's talk about the things you actually see in your game scene. In Unity, everything is a game object. The main character is a game object. The camera is a game object. Even the light in the sky is a game object. But a game object by itself is just an empty shell. It can't do anything. To make a game object do something, you have to give it parts. These parts are called components. Think of the game object as an empty superhero suit. The components are the gadgets you add to it. If you want it to see, you add a camera component. If you want it to make noise, you add an audio source component. If you want it to move physically, you add a Rigidbody component. The most important component is the transform. Every single game object has a transform. You cannot remove it. The transform tells you three things: position, rotation, and scale. Position is where it is. Rotation is which way it is facing. Scale is how big it is. If you want to move an object using code, you are usually talking to the transform component. Sometimes, you need to find a specific component in your code. We use a command called getComponent for this. For example, if your player gets hit and you want to lower their health, your code needs to find the health script attached to that player. You would say getComponent less than health greater than. This is like reaching into the superhero suit and grabbing a specific gadget to use it. Another big concept is prefabs. A prefab is like a stamp or a mold. Let's say you want to make an army of 100 zombies. You don't want to build each zombie one by one. That would take forever. Instead, you build one zombie, perfect it, and save it as a prefab. Then, you can make as many copies as you want. If you change the prefab, like giving the zombie a green hat, all 100 zombies will update to have a green hat. This saves you so much time. To create a copy of a prefab while the game is running, like shooting a bullet, we use a command called Instantiate. Instantiate creates a new clone of the object. On the other hand, if a zombie dies or a coin is collected, you want to remove it. For that, we use destroy. Managing all these objects can get tricky. If you are preparing for the exam, you need to know exactly when to use Instantiate versus when to just move an object. My Udemy practice tests cover these scenarios in detail. It helps you learn the patterns so you don't get tricked on the real exam. Also, visualizing the relationship between game objects and components can be hard, which is why my Etsy visual guides draw it out like a map. Practice questions. 1. What component does every game object have? Answer: transform. Explanation: the transform component stores position, rotation, and scale and cannot be removed. 2. What function do you use to create a new object instance in the game? Answer: instantiate. Explanation: instantiate makes a copy of an original object or prefab and adds it to the scene. 3. How do you remove an object from the game scene permanently? Answer: destroy. Explanation: the destroy function removes the game object or component from memory and the scene. 4. What is a prefab? Answer: a reusable asset template. Explanation: prefabs allow you to create, configure, and store a game object to use multiple times. 5. How do you access a specific script or component on an object? Answer: getComponent. Explanation: this method looks for a component of a specific type on the game object. 6. If you change a prefab, what happens to the instances in the scene? Answer: they all update. Explanation: changes to a prefab asset affect all linked instances in the scene automatically. 7. Which axis usually represents up in Unity 3D? Answer: y-axis. Explanation: in Unity's coordinate system, y is vertical, x is horizontal, and z is depth. 8. What happens if you disable a game object in the inspector? Answer: it hides and stops updating. Explanation: the object becomes invisible, and its scripts and components stop running. 9. Can a game object have more than one script attached? Answer: yes. Explanation: you can attach as many different script components as you need to a single game object. 10. Find do. Answer: searches for an object by name. Explanation: it looks through the entire scene to find a game object with the specific name you requested. 11. What is the parent-child relationship in the hierarchy? Answer: children move with the parent. Explanation: if you move or rotate a parent object, all child objects attached to it follow along. 12. How do you distinguish between two objects with the same name? Answer: use tags. Explanation: tags allow you to label groups of objects, like player or enemy, to find them easily. 13. What creates a folder structure inside the scene view to organize objects? Answer: empty game objects. Explanation: developers often use empty game objects as containers to keep the hierarchy list clean. 14. If you want to stop a sound from playing, which component do you access? Answer: audio source. Explanation: the audio source component controls playback, volume, and clips for sound. 15. What value represents no rotation in a quaternion? Identity. Explanation: this code equates to 0 rotation or the default rotation state. Section 3, Physics and Time. Now let's get things moving. In video games, things need to move smoothly. If you just add 1 to an object's position every frame, it will move faster on a fast computer and slower on a slow computer. That is bad. We want the game to play the same for everyone. Delta time. Delta time is a tiny number. It tells you how many seconds passed since the last frame. This makes movement smooth and fair, no matter how fast the computer is. Next, let's talk about physics. Unity has a built-in physics engine. If you want a ball to fall, bounce, or get pushed, you use a component called a rigidbody. When you add a rigidbody, gravity starts working on that object immediately. If you want to push the object, you don't change its transform position directly. Instead, you use code to add force to the rigidbody. It is like pushing a real car. You apply force, and the physics engine calculates where it goes. For objects to touch or hit each other, they need colliders. A collider is an invisible shape around your object. It matches the shape of the mesh, usually like a box or a sphere. When two objects with colliders hit each other, they bump. But sometimes, you want an object to detect a hit without bouncing, like walking through a ghost or picking up a coin. When is trigger is checked, objects pass right through each other. But the code still knows it happened. It sends a message called onTriggerEnter. This is perfect for automatic doors or finish lines. If you want him to bounce, you uncheck is trigger, and the code uses onCollisionEnter. Physics materials are fun too. They decide how the surface feels. Is it slippery like ice? Or bouncy like rubber? You create a physics material and attach it to the collider. Understanding the difference between colliders and triggers is a huge part of the exam. They love to ask about this. In my complete Udemy course, I have specific quizzes just on physics interactions to make sure you have this down. And if you get confused about which method to call, the Etsy visual guides show the flow of physics events clearly. Practice questions. 1. Delta time. Answer: to make movement frame rate independent. Explanation: it ensures objects move at the same speed regardless of how fast the computer renders frames. 2. What component adds gravity and physics forces to an object? Answer: Rigidbody. Explanation: the Rigidbody component hands control of the object over to the Unity physics engine. 3. If you check, is trigger, on a collider, what happens? Answer: objects pass through it, and it calls on trigger enter. Explanation: it stops being a solid wall and becomes a zone that detects entries, useful for collecting coins. 4. Which method is called when two solid objects hit each other? Answer: on collision enter. Explanation: this event triggers specifically when two non-trigger colliders make physical contact. 5. What do you use to make a floor slippery or bouncy? Answer: physics material. Explanation: physics materials define friction and bounciness and are applied to the collider component. 6. If an object is moving too fast and passes through a wall, what collision detection mode helps? Answer: continuous. Explanation: continuous collision detection prevents fast-moving objects from tunneling through thin objects. 7. What method is used to push a rigidbody object? Answer: add force. Explanation: add force applies a physical push to the object, allowing the physics engine to calculate movement. 8. To move an object using physics, should you use update or fixed update? Answer: fixed update. Explanation: fixed update runs at a consistent time interval, which keeps physics calculations stable. 9. Get axis, horizontal, return. Answer: a value between -1 and 1. Explanation: it returns a float representing left, right input from a keyboard or controller. 10. If you want an object to float in the air without falling, what rigidbody setting do you change? Answer: use gravity. Explanation: unchecking use gravity stops the physics engine from pulling the object down. 11. Can a collider exist without a rigidbody? Answer: yes. Explanation: static objects like floors and walls have colliders, but do not need rigidbodies because they don't move. 12. What happens if two objects collide but neither has a rigidbody? Answer: nothing happens. Explanation: the physics engine requires at least one moving object to have a rigidbody to detect the collision. 13. How do you detect if a player holds down a button? Get button. Explanation: get button returns true every frame the button is held down, unlike get button down which is only true once. 14. What is a raycast? Answer: an invisible line fired to detect objects. Explanation: raycasting is used for shooting or checking line of sight by drawing a line from point A to point B. 15. If you want to rotate an object using physics, what command do you use? Answer: Add torque. Explanation. Add torque applies rotational force to a rigid body to make it spin. Section 4. User Interface, UI. Now, let's talk about the user interface, or UI for short. This is everything the player sees on top of the game world, like health bars, score counters, and buttons. In Unity, the most important thing to know is the canvas. Think of the canvas like a clear sheet of plastic that sits in front of the camera. All your UI elements, like text and images, must live inside this canvas. If you try to put a button outside the canvas, it won't work, and you won't see it. When you work with UI, you will notice something different in the inspector. Regular game objects have a component called transform, but UI elements have a rect transform. This is special because it handles 2D shapes. It helps you position things on a flat screen instead of a 3D world. The most critical part of rect transform is the anchors. Anchors are like thumbtacks. They tell the UI where to stick. If you anchor a health bar to the top left corner, it will stay in the top left corner, even if the player resizes their window or plays on a different phone screen. If you don't set your anchors right, your buttons might fly off the screen on a different device. Next, let's look at buttons. A button in Unity is just an image with a special script attached. This script listens for a click. When you click it, it triggers an event. In the inspector, you will see a list called onClick. This is where you tell Unity what to do. It is very easy to set up without writing complex code. Text is another big one. There are two types of text in Unity, the old standard text and the new Text Mesh Pro. Text Mesh Pro is much better. It looks sharper and gives you more control, like outlines and shadows. For the exam, you should know that Text Mesh Pro is the standard now. Text property. Text equals score plus current score. One thing people often forget is the event system. When you create a canvas, Unity automatically creates an object called event system. Do not delete this. The event system is the brain of the UI. It handles all the input, like mouse clicks and touches. If you delete it, no buttons will work, and you will think your game is broken. We also have images and raw images. An image component expects a sprite, which is a 2D graphic. A raw image expects a texture. Usually, you will use image for icons and character portraits. To make a health bar that shrinks, you can change the fill amount on an image component. It is a simple slider that goes from 0 to 1. The UI system can be tricky because of how different screens work. In my full Udemy course, I break down exactly how to handle different screen sizes so you pass the exam questions on anchors and pivots. I also have visual guides on Etsy that show you exactly what each anchor setting does, so you don't have to guess. Practice questions. 1. What component is required for all UI elements to be visible? Answer. Canvas. Explanation. The canvas renders all UI elements, so they must be children of a canvas object to show up. 2. What replaces the standard transform component on UI objects? Answer. Rect transform. Explanation. Rect transform is used for 2D layout, controlling position, size, and anchoring for UI. 3. What object handles input events like clicks for the UI? Answer. Event system. Explanation. The event system component processes all input, like mouse clicks and touches, for the UI. 4. If you want a button to stay in the top right corner on any screen, what do you adjust? Answer: anchors. Explanation: anchors define the relative position of the UI element to the parent container's edges. 5. What property do you change in code to update the words on a TextMesh Pro object? Text. Text property holds the string that the player sees on the screen. 6. Which UI component is best for displaying a player's avatar or icon? Answer: image. Explanation: the image component is designed to display sprites, which are 2D graphical assets. 7. How do you make a health bar shrink as the player takes damage? Answer: change the image fill amount. Explanation: setting the image type to filled allows you to use a slider value between 0 and 1. 8. What happens if you delete the event system object? Answer: buttons stop working. Explanation: without the event system, the game cannot detect clicks or touches on UI elements. 9. What is the difference between screen space, overlay and screen space, camera? Answer: overlay sits on top of everything. Camera sits in front of a specific camera. Explanation: overlay renders UI directly on the screen, while camera renders it at a specific distance in the world. 10. To run a function when a button is pressed, which list do you use in the inspector? Answer: onClick. Explanation: the onClick list allows you to assign methods that trigger when the user interacts with the button. 11. What is the pivot point of a rect transform? Answer: the point around which the object rotates and scales. 5. 12. Can you put a 3D object inside the UI canvas? Answer: yes, but it requires specific settings. Explanation: while possible, standard UI elements are 2D, and mixing 3D requires rendering cameras or special shaders. 13. What is a sprite? Answer: a 2D graphic used for UI and 2D games. Explanation: sprites are textures imported with specific settings to work with the image component and 2D physics. 14. Which UI layout group arranges items in a straight line? Answer: horizontal or vertical layout group. Explanation: layout groups automatically position child elements in rows or columns, so you don't have to place them manually. 15. What does the canvas scaler component do? Answer: adjusts UI size based on screen resolution. Explanation: it ensures UI elements stay readable and proportional on both small phones and large monitors. Section 5. Animation and navigation. Making things move is not enough. You want them to feel alive. That is where animation comes in. In Unity, you use the Animator component. This component is like the puppeteer pulling the strings. It uses something called an Animator controller. These moves are called states. The lines connecting them are called transitions. You can't just switch from running to jumping instantly. You need a condition. We use parameters for this. In your code, you talk to the animator. Set bool is running true. When that happens, the animator sees the change and follows the arrow to the run state. Sometimes, you want to blend animations. For example, a character might walk, then jog, then run. Instead of 3 separate states, you use a blend tree. A blend tree mixes these animations smoothly based on a single number, like speed. It looks much more natural. Now, let's look at navigation. This is how enemies or NPCs, non-player characters, walk around without hitting walls. Unity uses a system called NavMesh, which stands for Navigation Mesh. Think of it as a blue carpet that you bake onto your floor. Baking just means calculating where the walkable areas are. The agents can only walk on the blue carpet. To make an enemy move, you give it a NavMesh agent component. This component is smart. Set destination, target. The agent will then calculate the best path, avoid walls, and even walk around other agents to get there. You don't have to program the physics of walking. The NavMesh agent does it all for you. You also have NavMesh obstacles. These are things that can move or block the path, like a locked door or a moving crate. The agent knows to walk around them. The exam loves to ask about the difference between the animator and the animation window. The animation window is for making the clips, while the animator window is for connecting them. It can get confusing. My visual guides on Etsy show the two windows side by side with arrows explaining what goes where. And if you want to practice setting up a NavMesh agent, my Udemy course has step-by-step questions to test your knowledge. Practice questions. 1. What component controls a character's animations? Answer: Animator. Explanation: the Animator component assigns an Animator controller to the GameObject to manage states. 2. What do you call the connecting lines between animation states? Answer: transitions. Explanation: transitions define the logic and conditions for switching from one animation clip to another. 3. What is a blend tree used for? Answer: mixing multiple animations smoothly. Explanation: blend trees combine clips, like walking and running, based on a parameter value like speed. 4. How do you tell a NavMesh agent where to go in code? Answer: set destination. Explanation: this method calculates the path to a specific vector 3 coordinate on the NavMesh. 5. What process creates the walkable surface for AI agents? Answer: baking the NavMesh. Explanation: baking analyzes the scene geometry to determine which surfaces are flat enough to walk on. 6. What parameter type is best for a simple on/off animation switch? Answer: bool. Explanation: a Boolean parameter, true, false, is perfect for states like is alive or is running. 7. What component allows an object to block a NavMesh path? Answer: NavMesh obstacle. Explanation: obstacles carve a hole in the NavMesh, forcing agents to find a path around them. 8. What is the difference between animation and animator? Answer: animation creates clips, animator manages logic. Explanation: you use the animation window to record movement and the animator window to control the flow. 9. What is a trigger parameter in the animator? Answer: a signal that resets after use. Explanation: triggers are used for one-time events like jump or attack and turn off automatically. 10. If an enemy gets stuck on a wall, what might be wrong? Answer: the NavMesh is not baked correctly. Explanation: if the blue NavMesh does not cover the floor near the wall, the agent cannot move there. 11. What is an animation event? Answer: a function call inside an animation clip. Explanation: it allows you to trigger code, like a footstep sound, at a specific frame of an animation. 12. Can a NavMesh agent climb stairs? Answer: yes, if the step height is set correctly. Explanation: in the bake settings, you can adjust the step height to allow agents to walk up stairs. 13. What is rude motion? Answer: animation that moves the game object. Explanation: instead of code moving the object, the animation itself drives the position and rotation. 14. How do you make an animation loop? Answer: check loop time in the import settings. Explanation: in the animation clip settings, enabling loop time makes it play continuously. 15. What does the has exit time checkbox do in a transition? Answer: forces the animation to finish before switching. Explanation: if checked, the next state waits for the current clip to complete. If unchecked, it can switch instantly. Section 6. Debugging and Scene Management. Finally, let's talk about what happens when things break, because they will break. Debugging is the art of finding and fixing problems. Your best friend is the console window. This is where Unity talks to you. It gives you 3 types of messages: logs, warnings, and errors. An error is red. Red means stop. A red error usually pauses your game or breaks a script. This sounds scary, but it just means you tried to use a variable that is empty. You forgot to drag the object into the slot, or you didn't find the component. To verify your game is running well, you use the profiler. The profiler is a tool that shows you how much memory and CPU power your game is using. If your game is lagging, the profiler tells you why. Maybe you have too many physics objects, or your scripts are too slow. Now, let's look at scene management. A game is made of many scenes: the main menu, level 1, level 2, and the game over screen. To switch between them, you need the scene manager. Load scene, level 1. But wait. If a scene is not in the build settings list, Unity cannot load it, and you will get an error. Speaking of builds, when you are ready to share your game, you build it. APK for Android. You choose your platform in the build settings. Lastly, let's touch on data. How do you save a high score? For simple things, we use player prefs. Player pref stores small pieces of data, like integers or strings, on the player's computer. It is perfect for saving settings like volume or the last level played. For bigger things, you need more complex systems, but for the exam, player prefs is usually the answer for simple saving. Understanding these final steps is crucial. Many students fail because they know how to code but don't know how to build the game. My Udemy practice test includes questions on build settings and the profiler to make sure you are fully prepared. Don't forget to grab the visual guides on Etsy to help you memorize the console icons and profiler graphs. Practice questions. 1. What common error means a variable has no value assigned? Answer: null reference exception. Explanation: this occurs when code tries to access an object reference that is empty or null. 2. Which window shows errors and debug messages? Answer: console. Explanation: the console is the primary output for all debug logs, warnings, and error reports. 3. What class is used to load a new level? Answer: Scene Manager. Explanation: Scene Manager contains the methods required to load, unload, and manage scenes at runtime. 4. Where must a scene be added before it can be loaded? Answer: Build settings. Explanation: the Scenes in Build list acts as an index. Scenes not in this list cannot be loaded. 5. What simple system is used to save high scores locally? Answer: Player Prefs. Explanation: Player Pref saves simple data types like int, float, and string to the device's storage. 6. What tool helps you find performance issues like lag? Answer: Profiler. Explanation: the profiler analyzes CPU, memory, and GPU usage to help you optimize the game. 7. What method prevents a "don't destroy on load" object from being removed? Answer: don't destroy on load. Explanation: this specific method tells Unity to keep the GameObject alive when switching to a new scene. 8. What color represents a warning in the console? Answer: yellow. Explanation: yellow icons indicate potential issues that won't necessarily crash the game but need attention. 9. How do you pause the game editor when an error occurs? Answer: enable error pause in the console. Explanation: this setting automatically pauses the editor play mode the moment a red error appears. 10. What function is called when the application quits? Answer: on application quit. Explanation: this Unity event allows you to save data or clean up before the game closes completely. 11. Can you edit code while the game is running? Answer: yes, but changes reset after stopping. Explanation: you can change variable values in the inspector, but they revert to original values once you stop playing. 12. Timescale equals 0 do? Answer: pauses the game. Explanation: setting the time scale to 0 stops all time-based updates, effectively freezing the game action. 13. What is a build index? Answer: the number assigned to a scene in build settings. Explanation: you can load scenes by their name or by this unique integer number. 14. How do you add a message to the console for testing? Log message. Explanation: this command prints your custom text to the console window for debugging purposes. 15. If your game runs slow, what is the most likely culprit in update? Answer: searching for objects constantly. Explanation: using heavy commands like find or get component inside update kills performance. Do it in start instead. You made it to the end of section 6. But remember, reading is one thing, and passing is another. To make sure you are 100% ready, you need to practice with the full test course on Udemy. It has hundreds of questions just like these. And for a quick cheat sheet you can keep on your desk, grab my visual guides on Etsy. The links are right there in the description. Go get them, and good luck with your exam.